Welcome back to the Dental Marketing Secrets Podcast. This is episode number 114, Why Patients Say Yes, Part 6. This is the final episode, and this one's focused around scarcity. Excited to be here with you guys. My name is Mark Thackeray, and we will finish up our series, little mini-series, on this book called Influence by Dr. Robert Cialdini, The Psychology of Persuasion. And it has been such a fascinating time. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about scarcity and why patients act when time or opportunity is limited. This is something that most of us are familiar with. And as we get into it, you'll probably discover that everyone is familiar with this principle at some point in their life, often at school, often with offers and deals, things like that. And we'll get into how that works. We're going to talk a little bit about why patients tend to delay treatment, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. But when something changes, that prompts them into action. That becomes a trigger for them to take some action. And oftentimes the reason for that change is their perceived availability. That goes down or gets limited in some way, and it triggers them to take action. It's that whole supply and demand concept. When there's limited supply, the demand goes up. And when that perception occurs, when that change in perception occurs in terms of the availability or in terms of supply, then the importance on that thing goes way up as well. So, and really the key insight to remember for this particular episode or this principle of scarcity is that people value things more when they run the risk of losing them. Okay. So that's the main thesis, I guess, or the main principle of this of scarcity, what we're talking about today. So just as a recap, if you haven't listened to the other episodes in this little mini series, there's 6 principles that Dr. Cialdini describes or outlines in this book of persuasion, 6 principles of persuasion that we see throughout our lives. He talked initially about reciprocity and how when we do something good for other people, oftentimes there's this sense of obligation to do something good for that person in return. And we see that often in our life. If you get invited to a party, oftentimes you feel the obligation or the need to reciprocate in kind and offer that person to a party. Or a Christmas card, for example. That is a classic example where you could send, and even the author did this, or maybe it was a friend that he knew did this, where they sent Christmas cards to people that he didn't even know and had no connection to, and they would send cards back more often than not. There's just that built-in idea or of reciprocity with other people. The second principle was commitment and consistency. People like to be, once they make a commitment, they like to be consistent with that commitment, and how those initial, sometimes small commitments will build momentum. And so go back and listen to these ones if you haven't listened to them yet. The third one was on social proof and how that builds safety. We tend to look around us for when we're unsure about ourselves. We tend to look around and see what other people are doing. Social proof has a big sway on what we tend to do in terms of, if we're looking for a new dentist, looking for a new restaurant, we often turn to other people to see what their experience was to help guide us in our decisions. The fourth principle was liking and how that builds connection, how that builds trust, and how that plays a big part in how people choose a dentist nowadays, because there are so many options available. And a lot of times it comes down to the relationship that they build with their provider. And if they have common ground, oftentimes that makes that relationship easier to establish and is generally a deeper relationship in the long run. The fifth principle is the principle of authority and how authority builds confidence. When in doubt, we turn to authority figures to guide us in our actions. And patients are not authorities on all things dental, right? They don't have the experience, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have the training to identify certain issues in their mouth. Oftentimes they've heard these terms, the dental terminology all their life, but they don't fully grasp what they mean in detail. And so they turn to doctors, they turn to providers for that information and for guidance. and how to use that properly and ethically. The last one, again, is scarcity, and we are going to get into that now. And this is one that, like I said, I think everyone's experienced this in some shape or form throughout their life, and it often serves as that final nudge to move people forward from thinking to actual action. So Dr. Cialdini, in his book, he describes scarcity as these two kind of main ideas. One is opportunities seem more valuable when they are less available, supply and demand. And then secondly, loss motivates more strongly than gain. So it's important to, if you're thinking about this in terms of how to help people make a good decision, you want to help them understand that what their options are, right? And help them understand that if an option, and really one of their options all the time, is that they can not do anything. They can choose not to decide, or this decision of inaction. That's a very real decision. And that's a very real option that many people take because they don't want to do the mental math of figuring it all out, of figuring out what the best path forward is. Oftentimes they just say, I don't know. And that means I'm choosing not to do anything about it right now. So it's important to help them understand the repercussions of that particular decision, and that this, again, that they will likely feel some pain, whether that's actual physical pain, or it could be some type of mental pain or financial pain down the road because of this decision to not decide, or this decision of inaction. So that's a very important thing to remember is, again, that the fear of loss motivates more strongly than the fear of gain. So in dentistry, oftentimes that means that helping someone understand prevention is a lot harder to understand than someone who's in pain and needs to find some relief. And that is obvious, right? When the patients you've seen, this plays out time and time again, that people would rather pay for pain and the relief of pain than to invest in prevention, which is the unfortunate truth with a lot of us. And that's part of this principle of scarcity, right? Is that it's they're seeking that if the relief is so much more scarce, is in shorter supply when they're feeling that pain, right? And so it's that prevention feels like it's available to everyone, right? You just do these simple steps, quote unquote simple steps, and then you will avoid that pain. But it feels so accessible, and in not in short supply. It's available to everyone, right? And so that makes it harder for people to grasp and to keep going. So there's a couple of books a couple examples from the book that I wanted to share. This was the cookies example. It's a classic example in many different psychology studies where participants they had identical cookies, and they gave them to different subjects, and because they were testing to see, does the availability or the perceived lack of availability increase the perceived value. So they had one jar that had lots of cookies in it, had 10 cookies in there, and then they had another jar with only 2 cookies left. And they wanted to test and see which one had a greater effect on the participants. And obviously the ones, as you can guess, based on the topic of today's podcast, it was the one with only 2 cookies in it. The smaller supply, the limited supply, generated a higher perceived value in those cookies. And we've seen that time and time again when we are shopping, when we are, looking for a restaurant possibly, and there's a line out the door, and they're only accepting so many more reservations, or things like that. When it's in short supply, we tend to equate that with value. That, man, that must be really good, or the quality must be exceptional, or this food must be some of the best food out there. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many people in line and only one spot available. It's it's very important to remember that. Okay. And then the next one is the deadline effect. This is another example that he shared, that Dr. Cialdini shares in his book. Products become more attractive when a deadline is introduced, or similar to the sale is ending, or the availability is limited, like in the cookies. Okay. So this time limitation creates action. And we've seen this time, or I saw it so many times in my life with deadlines in school. It's as a deadline approaches, all of a sudden it grabs our attention, because we know that there's this fear of loss about to occur if I don't start taking action, if I don't get my stuff together and put together this report or presentation or study for this test. There's going to be a pretty nasty consequence awaiting me if I don't do anything about it. And so it starts to consume more space in your brain. And then finally, one other one that I'll share is this reactance theory. When people feel that their freedom is limited, they desire the restricted option more. So, for example, when something is banned or limited, it becomes more appealing. And this is one of the arguments for legalizing things like marijuana and various drugs, because when it's banned, it has that greater appeal for a lot of people. It's often a reason why people start doing drugs or smoking, is that it appeals to their desire to be different, their desire to do something that's prohibited. Okay. So again, these are all important things to think about. That one isn't really one that I will directly apply to dentistry, but it's fascinating to think about it in those terms, right? That's one of the reasons why people do certain things or behave a certain way, is because some people they feel that the freedom is limited, and so they want whatever's limited more. Okay. So let's get into why, or how it reveals itself, how scarcity reveals itself inside dentistry. And dentistry actually has a lot of natural scarcity built in. There are things from logistical things, limited appointment slots. You can only see a fixed amount of appointments on a given day or a given week. And as you build up your practice, that scarcity increases. You already have recurring patients coming in, so your availability for new patients reduces over time. So that creates that natural scarcity, which is great, because we want to make sure, as with all of these principles, that we're using them ethically. We're not using them to strong arm patients into making a decision that's not good for them, or even making a decision that they don't really want to in some cases. But it's helping them understand the best course of action and encouraging them to do that for their benefit. Additional ways that scarcity shows itself inside dentistry include things like insurance benefits expiring. That's a natural scarcity principle in action, right? Because there's a deadline attached to that, and past that deadline, those benefits that they'd already paid for get washed down the drain, get flushed down the toilet. They go away. Okay, so that's a natural one. Healing windows is another one. It's another time frame, and it's limited. It's already predetermined generally, and so they have to cope with that. They have to address that. Bone loss, regression, right? I mean, that's something that's occurring for those that are missing teeth, that aren't doing anything about it. That's a natural scarcity principle in action. I mean, just because there's that bone, if you lose that bone, the more you wait, the more you lose. And so it's kind of this ticking clock for people, that's reminding people that they need to take action, for those that are aware of it. There's end of year deductibles, there's early treatment timing in orthodontics, there's doctor availability. There's a lot of these situations where scarcity happens naturally. It's not manufactured, it's not fake or anything like that. It already exists. And so those are the ones that I encourage people to think about and possibly focus on in their practice when they're dealing with patients. It's helping them understand that there's just limited availability. There's limited, a shorter time frame for certain treatment because of things that have already happened, bone loss, things like that. So now I think it's important to look at where scarcity is commonly misused inside dentistry. Inside, and we'd see this all the time with other businesses and throughout our life. There's those that try and use this for their own benefit, and it's not really an ethical use because they're trying to manipulate you. They're really trying to misuse things like fake deadlines. We see those that have, hey, it's a one-time offer, and then a week later, it expires tonight, and then a week later they're running the same offer, and you're like, okay, that's not really ethical. That's not not really honest to say it that way. So you want to avoid that at all costs. You want to avoid using fake deadlines. You don't want to manufacture urgency or use that kind of today only high pressure approach where the clock is ticking and they only have minutes left to make a decision. You get that in I was just booking a hotel the other day, actually, and I was looking at a room for these specific dates, and all of a sudden I noticed this ticking clock window. Hey, your session will expire in 10 minutes. And I'm like, okay, and I know they're trying to engage this principle of scarcity by adding in that countdown clock, which, I mean, whatever. I don't really value that. I don't think that's a great way to use it, just because it's this more artificial urgency, because then I could just sign in and yes, my session will expire. So I guess you could argue that it's not necessarily artificial totally, but I get the reason why they're doing it is because they want me to make that decision sooner than later. So I don't appreciate those type of tactics. I think you'd be better off not using those because people are becoming wiser to it, spotting those. Fear-based is another thing that gets commonly used to try and create this idea of scarcity. So in dentistry, it could be that you're exaggerating claims on what might happen if they don't take action right away, if they're not coming in for treatment. So avoid that. It's important to avoid that and not use this to manipulate. Okay. Don't exaggerate those risks. It's not worth it. Your integrity is not worth it at all. Okay. So focus on those, like I mentioned, those situations where that principle of scarcity naturally arises. It's not something you have to create or manufacture. So I'm thinking more along the lines of, instead of saying, maybe giving a certain window that says you have to do it by now or by 30 days from now or this specific date, things like the longer we wait, the more complex this whole situation becomes. Bone support doesn't regenerate on its own. I mean, helping them see the facts, helping them understand in some cases the gravity of the situation, that there will be a point of no return where we can no longer place an implant unless we do a graft, unless we take additional measures. Those are natural scarcity windows that you can help patients understand. It's always good to play the prevention side, but just know that it's harder. It's a harder sell because people don't see the pain immediately. And I see that right now, in myself. I see that with my teenagers. They don't have immediate side effects of certain habits. And so they don't do anything about it. There's no immediate repercussion that's causing them pain or discomfort. But if they continue along certain things, it will. And I've seen that with myself. We know certain things. We know we need to do take certain actions, behave a certain way, take care of our body, for example, fruits and vegetables, whole foods, that sort of thing. And sometimes when we don't do that, nothing happens that we can tell immediately. And so we keep putting it off and neglecting that behavior, but eventually it catches up to us. We've got to elevate our our philosophy. As Jim Rohn would say, you got to elevate your philosophy because you can't keep thinking like you're in second grade. You know, he's like, there's a reason those chairs don't fit when you're 25. It's because you got to grow up. You got to think and improve your philosophy. So it is important, again, to stress the intervention, early intervention. I'm just saying that it's going to be harder, and don't get frustrated when they don't buy into that right away. Other things too, I mentioned the insurance scarcity benefits reset at the end of the year. That's always an easy one, and most practices that are in network with insurances already do this quite well because they've been through the drill. But I will say that there is still a lot of benefits left on the table, because typically practices wait until October, November, December. You've got all these holidays you're battling with, and you've already got a limited availability, a limited schedule to get those people in. So I would recommend starting much earlier, and June, July, start tooting that horn. And yeah, you're still going to get people that wait because of this scarcity principle. The deadline hasn't occurred yet, and it's not really right in their face just yet when it's middle of the year. I still have 6 months. I still have 5 months. I still have 3 months. It's your job to put on your persuasion hat and do the best you can to say, hey, I know we still have 3 months left, but our schedule is filling up fast. We only have X amount of appointments, and be, again, honest with that. At this time, and every year this happens. Every year there are so many people that get left out because we just don't have the time. It fills up, and then we don't have any more. That's just how it works. So you've got to do a better job of conveying that, of articulating that, so that people can see that they need to take action sooner than later. There are opportunities for those deadlines, those promotions. Promotions are a great way to introduce scarcity, as long as they're true, as long as they're honest, right? So if you run a promotion, I've done this before with practices and clients where we've done a crown promotion, for example. And I don't encourage you doing this over and over again, because then you'll condition patients to look for that. And that's not what you want. Reminds me of the sushi restaurant that's a couple miles from my house. I pass by and I always chuckle. They've got this, it's actually a permanent sign that says 50% off sushi, all sushi. And I just chuckled because it's that doesn't, when it's permanent, you can tell it's a fixed sign. They're not taking that down. It's not, it really doesn't entice you to go, not incur, but it doesn't engage this principle of scarcity, because you know that it's not true. But you can do these promotions that have a fixed ending to them. They're finite, right? You run them for one specific month, and that's what we did in this crown promotion. We ran it for 1 month. We let people know this is something we do not do at all or often, or we've never done it before, which was all true. And obviously, if you do it the second time, you can't say that, but in this case, it was true. And we had tremendous results just because people recognized that it was a great value, and that they didn't know if it would come again. And we didn't do it again. It was a one-time thing. And so it's those can be done, and those can be done effectively. And I would encourage people too, when you're doing those type of campaigns, to give a reason why you're doing it. People want to know the reason behind the good deal, the offer, because they're always asking themselves, oh, what's the catch? This seems too good to be true. And if you give them a reason why, it helps to assuage that fear, or that doubt in their mind that there's something wrong about this situation. So help describe why you're doing it. And it actually has been proven you don't need an amazing reason either. It could just be that it was your birthday last month, or something silly like that, or something absurd. I'm just doing it because I love this month. One of my best friends was born in this month. It could be something very random, and that works too. So we've been over, the principle of scarcity, why it works on us psychologically. There's this fear of loss, which is much stronger than the fear of gain, or the benefit of gain, right? We want to avoid loss more than we want to gain something in return. And then also just this idea of when there's limited availability, it increases our urgency. It increases the perceived value we have of that specific thing. So, and that's, again, one of the reasons why patients, they delay on treatment, but not because they disagree with you, not because they don't believe in your recommendations. But they don't take action because they can, because that's an option for them. They see, well, okay, I'm not in any immediate pain right now, so I'm not feeling the pain, I'm not feeling the pressure. And as a result, they don't do anything, right? So if we can help them understand that educate them on, it's going to be more painful if you wait. And I think generally providers do a good job of this. So I'm not going to spend too much time, but it is worth mentioning that. Is helping them, those people that are likely to delay, helping them really paint the picture clearly of how taking action sooner than later will benefit him in so many different ways. Just getting clear and detailed, really get a vivid description of what that looks like. Hey, you're taking action now. That's building confidence for the future. It's taken it off your list. Now you can avoid all these things, all these potential, painful experiences, expensive, bills down the road for treatment that you could have prevented just by doing it now. And now you have, the time and means to do other things with those resources, with your time, with your money. And now you're becoming a better version of you by making a more confident decision, a more informed decision. You're acting more responsibly. Probably wouldn't use that word. You don't want to make them feel dumb, but you get the picture. You're starting to help them see that they're becoming a better person by making better informed, more educated decisions earlier rather than waiting. So, where to apply this? Again, we've kind of talked through some of that, but we've got email reminders to inform patients of their appointments, and that hey, if you can't make that, that's a great little line to add in there, assuming it's true, is that, hey, your appointment's coming up on, March 5th. If you're unable to make it, we don't have our next available appointment isn't until April 15th, tax day. No, or something like that. But again, you want it to be ethical and honest, but that alone can help people think, oh man, well, I do need to come in. It's important for me to come in and make this or keep this appointment. Recall notices, treatment follow-up, a lot of these things can be applied in these situations. Seasonal campaigns we just ran through, expiring insurance, talked about start earlier, missed call, follow-up, things like that. So that is pretty much the principle of scarcity. Again, I think most of us are familiar with it once we get into it. And it's a powerful principle at play in our lives in so many different situations. Start looking around, see how this has affected you, and you will gain even more understanding and clarity on how this operates and how effective it can be. So again, if you haven't read this book, this is the end of this series on influence, the psychology of persuasion, or why patients say yes. That's kind of what I've titled this mini series. It is a fantastic read. If you're at all like me and just like to get into the weeds on, psychology, on what motivates people, why are they choosing to do what they're choosing to do? I mean, if you ever wondered those questions, this is a great read. It's replete with all these different types of examples to help really paint the picture on how these principles operate in our lives and how people use them for good and for bad. And so it's a great way to understand how it works, but he also gives you tools on how to combat some of these principles when it's not in your best interest and people are using them, maybe not in the best way. So a good read, go grab it on Amazon or go to the library and check it out, or get the audiobook. He does the reading himself, Dr. Cialdini. So it's fun to hear from the author, and he does a good job too, I think. So grab that book. And if you have any questions about this series or about the podcast or about marketing in general, I would love to hear from you. We love getting questions, love getting feedback. We've got some great episodes coming up. We've got one specifically around hygiene. We've got one about pricing. Am I charging the right fees? Things like that. So a lot of good episodes coming up, but I still love your feedback. Love to see if there's anything in particular that's you've been wrestling with, then just let me know and we can do an episode around that. And if you've had a good experience with this podcast, please leave us a review. That just makes my day when I get a new review, and it helps other people and other practices or providers find this podcast and gain some better insights on what they can do to change their situation, to use marketing as a powerful lever, really to gain more availability, or to gain more patients, to gain more freedom, and to gain more opportunity. So yeah, love those reviews. And until then, my friends, we will be good, and we'll see you next time.